Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first story is titled, A Kid's Revenge on the Bully Went Not Quite as Intended. A revenge story told by my best friend. He was bullied a lot as a kid. My friend was a Boy Scout, but of course there was a bully there as well, making his life miserable. When my friend was 9 to 10 years old, the Boy Scouts went on a weekend hike. They slept at a farm, all of them in the same room. The farm had a lot of apple trees. The fruit was ripe. The farmer told them to eat all the fruit they wanted. And so they did. Eating big amounts of apples has some strange effects. It is one of the few substances known to man that goes straight from the solid form to gas. When evening came, the farting started. Regarding boys' humor, nothing beats a good fart. So they had a lot of fun. My friend was very tired and was the first one to fall asleep in his sleeping bag. He suddenly woke up and looked up in an area of the human body that never sees the light of sun. The bully, of course, squatting over him and farting him straight in the face. The other boys thought it was hilarious and were howling with laughter. For my friend, this was the last drop. After a while, he pretended to fall back asleep. When everyone was fast asleep, he stood up and went over to the bully. He had his naked ass hovering an inch or two over the bully's nose, and then he fired the big cannon. He told me that if it had been a farting competition, he would have secured the gold medal for sure. The effect was instant. The sounds from the bully were a mix of screams and puking noises. He panicked and got stuck in his sleeping bag. Then, someone turned on the lights. It turned out that the fart was not entirely in gas form as intended. The horrified face of the bully had got a lot of instant freckles, and some in his mouth as well. He tried to bully my friend a few times after, but just whispering freckles was an instant mute. The next story is entitled Neighbor Chopped Down a Tree on My Property to Destroy My Pool Because I Refused to Let Her Access My Pool. I had always dreamed of having a beautiful home, complete with a stunning pool in the backyard. When I finally found the perfect house on a quiet street, I was thrilled. It was everything I had ever wanted, and I couldn't wait to spend my weekends lounging by the pool, sipping a cold drink, and soaking up the sun. However, my excitement was short-lived when I met my neighbor Karen. From the moment I met her, I knew she was going to be trouble. She was a middle-aged woman with short, choppy hair, who seemed to enjoy nothing more than making other people's lives miserable. She was loud, brash, and had a sharp tongue that could cut through steel. I quickly learned that Karen was an entitled woman who believed that she was entitled to anything she wanted, whenever she wanted it. At first, I didn't mind Karen using my pool occasionally, but soon it became a daily occurrence. Karen would show up with her 2 unruly children, expecting me to supervise them while they splashed around in the pool. Her kids would break things, eat all my food, and leave a mess everywhere they went. I tried talking to Karen about it, but she just laughed it off and continued to use my pool without permission. Eventually, I had enough and told Karen that she and her children were no longer welcome to use my pool. Karen didn't take it well and began harassing me, showing up at my doorstep every day, demanding access to my pool. She even went as far as to sneak into my backyard when I wasn't home. It was clear that she wasn't going to give up easily. One morning, I woke up to find that my house had been vandalized. The windows were broken and the walls were covered in graffiti. I knew instantly that Karen was behind it. She had gone too far this time, and I was determined to put a stop to her behavior. I called the police and filed a report, but Karen denied any involvement. The situation escalated, and I ended up having to take her to court. It was a stressful and expensive process, but in the end I won the case and was awarded damages for the repairs to my house. Karen was forced to pay me a substantial amount of money, and she was also banned from coming within 500 feet of my property. I thought that was the end of it, but Karen wasn't one to give up easily. While I was away on a work trip, Karen hired an illegal contractor to chop down the beautiful oak tree in my backyard, hoping it would fall onto my pool and destroy it. I was devastated when I came back to find my tree gone and my pool damaged. I was angry, but I knew what I had to do. I took Karen back to court, and this time I wasn't holding back. I sued her for everything she was worth, and she was forced to declare bankruptcy. Karen lost everything, and everyone in the neighborhood knew what she had done. For a while, things were quiet. I thought that Karen had finally learned her lesson and would leave me alone. But one day, I received a package in the mail. It was a photo album filled with pictures of me and my family taken in our backyard. At first, I thought it was a gift from a friend, but then I noticed the note attached to it. It was from Karen, and the note read, "I'm watching you." I was terrified. I didn't know what to do or who to turn to. I called the police, but they said there was nothing they could do unless Karen threatened me directly. I lived in constant fear, never knowing when Karen was going to strike again. One night, I heard a loud banging on my front door. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if it was Karen or just some kids playing a prank, but the banging grew louder and more persistent, so I slowly made my way to the door. I peeked through the peephole and saw Karen standing outside, a wild look in her eyes. "Open up!" she screamed, pounding on the door. "I know you're in there!" I froze, not knowing what to do. I didn't want to let her in, but I also didn't want to provoke her any further. Before I could make a decision, the door suddenly burst open and Karen came charging inside. I stumbled backward, trying to get away from her, but she was too fast. She grabbed me by the shoulders and shook me, her fingers digging into my flesh. "You think you can just take what's mine?" she screamed, her face twisted with anger. "You think you're better than me? I'll show you who's boss." I tried to fight her off, but she was too strong. She pushed me to the ground and began kicking me, her feet connecting with my ribs and my stomach. I curled up in a ball, trying to protect myself, but the blows kept coming. It felt like it went on forever, but eventually Karen stopped and walked out of the house, slamming the door behind her. I lay there for a long time, gasping for breath and trying to process what had just happened. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what. I couldn't live in fear anymore. I had to stand up to Karen and make sure she couldn't hurt me or anyone else ever again. I decided to hire a private investigator to look into Karen's background and find out what she was capable of. It was a risky move, but I knew I had to do something to protect myself. The investigator came back with some shocking information. Karen had a history of violence and had been arrested several times for assault and battery. She had also been diagnosed with a personality disorder that made her prone to erratic behavior and extreme mood swings. With this information in hand, I went back to court and filed for a restraining order against Karen. This time, the judge didn't hesitate to grant it, and Karen was forced to stay away from me and my property. She was also required to undergo psychiatric evaluation and attend anger management classes. I thought that was the end of it, but Karen wasn't done yet. A few months later, I received a call from one of my neighbors, informing me that Karen had been arrested for breaking into my house and stealing some of my belongings. She had apparently gone on a rampage, smashing things and screaming obscenities before the police arrived and took her away. I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness when I heard the news. Part of me was glad that Karen was finally behind bars where she couldn't hurt anyone else. But another part of me felt sorry for her, knowing that she was clearly suffering from some serious mental health issues that had gone untreated for far too long. In the end, I decided to sell my house and move away from the neighborhood. I couldn't bear to stay in a place that held so many bad memories for me. But I also knew that I had learned a valuable lesson through this experience, that no matter how beautiful a house may be, it's the people who live in it that truly matter.
The next story is titled, Since We're Talking About Cutting in Line. When I was barely into my teens, I went to the fair with my dad and brother. There was a popular ride. We were in line and almost at the entrance. Some lady and her husband pushed their 2 sons in line in front of us. The poor kids were like, okay, and looked somewhat ashamed. So then, when they turn away, my dad tells us to walk in front of them. We did. Then we could hear the lady yell at her kids in Takahe, "Pay attention. They're stealing your spot in line." My dad said, "What's wrong with her? I can't believe she wants to raise her kids like that." And we kept going. The kids knew that what they did was wrong. The dad was just lost in oblivion, and the mom was mad. The next story is titled, I Destroyed My Family Friend's Business and Credibility. The background. A few years after I started university, a friend of my mother's, who we will call Cook, started what can be generously called a restaurant in a small town a couple hours outside of the city we lived in. It was really a glorified hot dog stand and a golf course. My mother had invested money into the business, so she had a small personal stake in ensuring its success. That meant that she would often enlist us, aka my brother and I, to waiter when she could not do it herself. And my brother hated this guy, though I don't blame him. Cook had no idea how to run a business, and he was completely uninterested in learning. He was also completely computer illiterate, and had me set up the Google account for his business. And in order to get us to work in his business, he would pick one of us up from our home, drive us 2 hours or so out of town, and we were basically stuck there until we were driven back due to the fact that neither of us had a driver's license. And since my brother had problems with this guy, legit concerns that were brushed off as him having a bad attitude, I was the one who more often than not had to spend 2 to 10 days at a time there, stuck in a barely livable house until I was laid back home. My mother was no better. C, manage a business at all. D, utilize my brother and I in the most effective way, considering my brother had already graduated from university, and I was working towards a double major in business. Furthermore, they were completely unprofessional. They would host shouting matches in Chinese for customers to hear, and the kitchen was filthy despite Cook's insistence that the kitchen was the cleanest place in a restaurant. Yeah, right. An ice rink was less slippery than the ground in there, and he would routinely touch cooked food after handling raw meat. And I distinctly remember sweeping up what I thought was a green bell pepper, only to realize it was a moldy onion ring. Even the stove area was dripping grease. Literally, a big-ass drop landed on my arm one time. They could not train staff at all. They had hired 5 people in the first year, and none of them came back the next. Cook, in particular, was especially two-faced in how he handled customers. He would smile at them and greet them, remembering details from previous conversations, and then turn to me and say in Chinese about how they're all stupid, stingy retirees with too much money and free time on their hands. All this left a great feeling of resentment for both me and my brother. Not only was it effectively trapping us to work for this completely incompetent individual, we would get basically nothing out of it. This was particularly frustrating for me because, as a business student at the time, I could see all the ways the place could improve. I even offered to write up some policies, do some inventory management, and take a look at the administrative side just to help out and get some experience for myself. They kept insisting that they didn't need it. Sure, we were paid bare minimum and the guy did know how to cook, but we have to bear with the brunt of their frustration while hiding the fact that we were sick of helping out. Until we couldn't anymore. The incident. Last year, I graduated from university. It wasn't as happy of a time as it should have been because my grandpa passed away the week before. I couldn't even celebrate the night before I walked the stage because A, I had to give part of the eulogy the previous day, and B, I had to mediate an incident between my brother, my mother, and Cook because my mother couldn't. No pre-graduation shots for me because I was stuck on the phone for 3 hours listening to how insensitive Cook was over the fact that my grandpa just passed away. But I figured that once I walked the stage and I had my diploma, I could spend that next week job hunting. No dice. Immediately after I graduated on the Monday afterwards, my mother voluntold me that I had to work 10 days in the Hellstraunt. I lasted 6 before it happened. By all accounts, it wasn't that busy of a day to start off with. There was a breakfast brunch for Father's Day that barely anyone attended, and most people that did show up wanted to order off the menu. But both Cook and my mother were incredibly stressed out, and both of them were taking it out on me. My mother spent the day micromanaging me and finding flaws in every little thing I did, like cleaning an empty table over clearing plates from a table out on the deck, to not immediately refilling coffee or water when a glass or mug was half full, to not table touching every 5 minutes. Cook just shouted a lot and gave contradictory orders every 2 minutes. But it was the combination of my mother and Cook screaming at me for a mistake I didn't even make, something about a sauce that a customer requested but they got mad about, refusing to listen to me, literally shutting me down when I opened my mouth, and Cook mocking me for breaking down in tears. I remember him saying, "You're 25, you should know better than to cry over a stupid mistake," made me realize that not only could I not handle it anymore, but I wanted to burn the place to the ground. I booked a flight out of the province that day and left a week later. I didn't even tell my mother when or why I left. The revenge. Remember how I said that not only were they completely unprofessional, but also completely computer illiterate? See, despite the fact that I was no longer in the province, I still had all the login information for the business. Furthermore, because I knew all the laws that he blatantly refused to learn, I knew all the violations that he had committed in the business. For the first part of my revenge, I signed out his computer from the Google account. I don't think it was really necessary since he never used that computer in the first place for anything other than porn, but I want to make sure that he and my mother wouldn't be able to stop me. Before I left the province, I claimed the business in review sites using the email and the business phone number. Then, I blasted every single review, positive or negative, with all the crap he used to say about customers. Any negative review was immediately mocked. Any positive review was left with a note of "thank you, you cheap bee." Any questions were met with hostility, and it basically boiled down to "I'm right, you're wrong."
I also make mentions about how he didn't wash his hands in the kitchen, and the stuff they're yelling in Chinese are insults about uppity customers. Given that it was a tourist-based town, I'm fairly certain that deep dip of sales that my brother mentioned later on was because of all those. And no one suspected a thing because my mother and cook didn't know how to work the internets, and my brother didn't care enough to look up the business. Next, I meticulously documented all the complaints that I had between my brother and myself, as well as the ones from the few people Cook had hired but never kept because he could not train them. I reported the 2 times that I slipped in his kitchen, incidents where he refused to wash his hands in between handling salad and raw meat because it took too long, and I handed those off to the Health Services Department. I also anonymously informed the Tax Revenue Agency that he was severely underreporting income, as employees were instructed only to write down the credit-debit receipts to report in sales. The third part of my revenge wasn't really my part, to be honest. Rather, it was because of his own incompetence. As I said before, he was completely computer illiterate. I didn't even have to lock out the person he hired to do accounting because he didn't bother reporting his expenses except hand them a garbage bag full of receipts. To be honest, I felt kinda sorry for them, but because their hands were tied, they couldn't dispute any of the claims that I made. What I did do, however, was text them all the things that my mother and cook said about them so that they wouldn't bother trying to defend his ass. They quit a month before the crap hit the fan, meaning that Cook was left holding the bag. So naturally, given that the business wasn't making near as much money to make rent, let alone pay off all the fines that he was slapped down with, the government repossessed everything. From everything in the dinky little house that he was renting for business purposes to every single fork and knife he bought. Because of all the health code violations, he couldn't find a job as a cook again, which was his only job for about 30 years. And because the Tax Revenue Agency knew how bad he was with managing businesses, they naturally denied him when he requested a permit to open up a growing operation. As far as I know, he's no longer in contact with my family, but his brother-in-law, who is my mom's hairstylist, mentioned that he had to move somewhere else to get away from all the bad reputation. My mother mostly got off scot-free because all of the business permits and licenses were under his name, but she lost quite a lot of money, and last I heard, my family had to move into a smaller house. And no one knew that I was the one who was doing it. My brother suspected, as he relayed details of what had happened to me, but I never confirmed it. Not that he would tell my parents, because honestly, duck that hellstrom. As for me, I'd like to say that everything's sunshine and roses, but my decision to impulsively move provinces had its ups and downs. I did manage to find a place to live and a place to work, so at least I'm alive. It's hard, but I'd rather be doing this than going back. The next story is titled, "Wanna Have Parties While I'm Away? Guess you get what you get." So, this was back in 2007, 2008 or so. I had been living in an apartment with a roommate that turned out to be a raging alcoholic. Things mostly weren't bad, and we both had friends over and couch surfers and the like. Well, our apartment wasn't in the greatest of shape. Some airsoft divots in the walls from a few a-hole friends, carpets stained and dirty, but they were old when we moved in, etc. But nothing that wasn't repairable. It comes to move out, we have a few weeks left, and I'm at the apartment maybe 3 or 4 days out of the week and spending the others at my grandparents' house. I got sent to work at a secondary work location, and that made more sense than driving 45 minutes each way. So, in my time at the apartment, I'm spending time packing everything I own into my little 90s Mazda Protege, getting ready to move to AZ and dealing with vacation time and transferring outside my district for work. On top of all that, I'm spending a ton of time cleaning, patching holes, etc. I leave for a few days and come back to an empty apartment. There are bags full of empty bottles and cans in the kitchen, nearly waist deep, and a beautiful hole punched in the wall near the bathroom stuffed with bendy straws. So, I take care of all that, get the stuff to patch the hole, and then leave for a few more days of work knowing that I would have to be back for the walkthrough inspection. The day after my last work day, I had messaged my roommate and told him he needed to get color match paint and paint over the repairs that I did to the hole, and he didn't do it. So, I show up at the apartment with a couple hours to go until the walkthrough in order to polish up on any little things, only to find he never painted the one thing I asked him to do, and it's not done. So, I run to Ace, get the paint over, and open all the windows so the smell can dissipate. Then, the walkthrough happens, and they say that they can smell the fresh paint, but can't tell where it is, so I must have done one heck of a repair job. Damn right. Cue petty revenge. When we got the deposit back, it was sent to me, and since I had to spend so much time and effort cleaning and repairing the apartment and didn't get any help in return, I instead told my roommate that they charged us for the carpets and pocketed that money instead. Wasn't a lot of money, probably about half what I would have been paid as a handyman doing the same repair work. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.